No holding back. From windmills to NATO, Donald Trump letting the world have it from the podium of the World Economic Forum. For more than an hour, the President of the United States taking on all comers in his first return to Davos in 6 years. We'll ask about the latest threatening language on tariffs and grabbing Greenland, and how an audience of corporate executives feels about a showdown with Europe that's rekindled the threat of a trade war. How much of it is really about that Arctic dependency of Denmark? And as the U.S. frames it, the broader scramble for the raw materials that will power artificial intelligence. Flying into the Swiss Alps, Trump harder on Europeans than on the Chinese and the Russians, whom he again blamed in equal measure with the Ukrainians for so far failing to agree to stopping their war. Ultimately, after a year where corporate titans paid even less tax and netted yet more profits, do those in the room in Davos care if the U.S. is turning its back on free trade, international law, the independence of its own central bank? Today in the France 24 debate, what to make of Trump's message in Davos. And with us from the Swiss resort, André Lezequig-Petry, Chair and Scientific Director of the Joint European Disruptive Initiative. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Francois.
How's the weather today in Davos this Wednesday?
It's very, very cold, and the only place where there's not too much noise to join your show is actually on the promenade, where the whole Davos crowd is going back and forth.
Well, let's hope
I'm freezing, but I'm happy to be with you.
You're freezing, and we're hoping that your battery holds out if you're outdoors there under those cold conditions. Thanks for joining us. We want to thank as well tech entrepreneur Tariq Karim, creator of the think tank Cybernetica. You've worked on startups on both sides of the Atlantic. You know what Davos is all about. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And Lucas Chancel, co-director of the World Inequality Lab at the Paris School of Economics. Your latest book, Energy and Inequality, A Political History. Energy coming up a lot in conversation during Trump's speech. Thanks for being with us. Your report, by the way, for 2026 just out. If you're on the go, like on the shuttle bus in Davos, for instance, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, there was a plane malfunction. It delayed the flight in, but Donald Trump making up for lost time with a 75-minute speech where he threw down the gauntlet and addressed the elephant in a room, a showdown over Danish dependency, Greenland, serious enough to have triggered an emergency EU summit that is set for this Thursday.
I'm seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States. But this would not be a threat to NATO. This would greatly enhance the security of the entire alliance, the NATO alliance. The United States is treated very unfairly by NATO. I want to tell you that. We never asked for anything, and we never got anything. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that.
André Lezequig-Petry, Denmark's already reacted, saying that Trump's designs on Greenland, in their eyes, remain intact. And you heard in that clip kind of mixed messages from the U.S. president. Was it anything new? Is the needle moving?
Well, there's one thing new, is that he addressed immediately the topic of force. The fact that he passed the message that he will not use force is kind of a relief for the Europeans. The worry I personally have is that they may just sound like, okay, let's. Sorry, apparently something is happening right now in Davos, so there's a lot of agitation.
We can hear you fine, so go ahead, André.
Okay. So, and the second thing is, clearly the speech, as unstructured it seems, on Greenland was very structured, because he basically addressed heads-on the topic on the fact that it would be a the end of NATO. He actually addressed the fact that, at the contrary, in his regard, it would actually be strengthening NATO. It was interesting to see how he basically addressed the crowd, saying, "Do you want me to talk about Greenland?" So he went heads on also. He said, "Okay, I know this is the important topic you were all here for." Then what obviously is very clear and will make a lot of Europeans unsettled is that his definitely has a resolution of taking over Greenland and, as he said, open immediate negotiations. So the question is, are the European leaders to really clearly put a red line saying this is not acceptable? Or are we engaging into a negotiation where, Donald Trump, with his usual tactic of asking the maximum, will at the end get something in return? And I think this is the big risk. I have a sentiment here in Davos of even CEOs of others being shared between a sort of cynicism about the US ally, and some talk even about humiliation, but the fact that the leaders are not necessarily able to draw this clear red line. The only one who did it, and he's really the hero of Davos so far, is Mark Carney. So it's basically the Canadian Prime Minister that's showing the way and the strategic way of not responding tactically like most of the European leaders have done, eloquently, but still tactically, compared to the Prime Minister of Canada, who basically talked about it's now time to decouple strategically from the US, which I think for the US is a massive blow from a strategic point of view. So the question is, what will be the reaction of the adults in the room back in DC and in the other power centers of the US?
And in Brussels, again, where there's going to be that summit on Thursday. Yeah, you mentioned Mark Carney, and there was a bit of a nod in Carney's speech to the cover of this week's edition of The Economist, the return of gunboat capitalism, a play on the term gunboat diplomacy in vogue during the age of late 19th century Western imperialism. He commented, the Canadian Prime Minister, on this world of showdown and shows of strength.
Every day, we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading. Canada was amongst the first to hear the wake-up call, leading us to fundamentally shift our strategic posture. To help solve global problems, we're pursuing variable geometry. In other words, different coalitions for different issues based on common values and interests. Argue the middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Krim, when Davos is supposed to be a talk shop for business executives, but always, of course, whatever the big issue of the political issue of the day is, will come to dominate. This time, though, it seems to be even more so than ever before. Your thoughts listening to Trump and to Carney spar over what the world global order should look like and whether or not in real time we're watching that global order unravel.
It's very interesting because you have two visions competing. The one that is we build the economy and we're basically making money through globalization. And there are small groups growing around Trump that believe that making the world unstable, creating this rapport de force between countries and basically promoting a form of deglobalization will actually make them rich.
What, the Silicon Valley mantra of move fast and break things?
Yes. And the idea that because of the advantage in AI, by the way, the US is only growing because of AI at the moment. So we can feel that there's a lot of uncertainty in how long this growth will stay. But also the fact that none of the key issues were actually on, the conflict between Europe is basically, is the US going to shut down the technology and put Europe in a big bad position? And is Europe, apparently someone at Deutsche Bank created a note and said, there's a note about potentially selling, U.S. assets as a retaliation to trade war. And Scott Besson was kind of annoyed by this, and the CEO of Deutsche Bank said, no, this is just a scenario. So what we see is that the real threats for the moment, are not really pushed away. We have the Greenland. We have the idea that America is not going to defend Europe. You're going to have to pay. But for the moment, the very I would say annoying and efficient weapons are not put on the menu for the moment.
All right. Over the weekend, you just alluded to it, the head of foreign exchange at research at Germany's Deutsche Bank sending a note to clients stating, Europe owns Greenland and a lot of U.S. Treasury bonds. European countries own $8 trillion of U.S. bonds and equities, almost twice as much as the rest of the world combined, with U.S. dollar exposure still very elevated across Europe. Developments over the last few days have the potential to further encourage dollar rebalancing. And Lucas Chancel, as Tariq Krim just said, the U.S. Treasury Secretary telling an audience at Davos that actually Deutsche Bank's chief executive called him to say, oh no, the bank doesn't stand by the report of its head of foreign exchange research.
That's really the heart of the problem. And in fact, Donald Trump is like...
Could Bessent be lying, or do you think that the head of Deutsche Bank actually called him?
Well, the fact that he has to say this means that it matters for him and it matters for them. And in fact, I think the broader picture is the following. Donald Trump is like a bully waking up and realizing that if the rest of the world play by his rules, he's about to be bullied. And why do I say that? Because, in fact, the U.S. economy, from a historical perspective, is not in a good situation. This is an economy that, on average, every year of the past 40 years, has done a trade deficit of 3 to 4% of its GDP per year. So basically, the U.S. buys from the rest of the world more than it's able to sell to the rest of the world. And how do they finance these purchases? Debt. Right? So the U.S. has a huge external debt, 70% of its GDP that is owned by the rest of the world. And this is what the Deutsche Bank is referring to.
And of course, the trade-off there is that the rest of the world likes the fact that the U.S. dollar is a steady currency and can be the currency of reference.
Until now, it has been seen as such. If interest rates on this debt start to increase, well, this is going to be a particularly problematic thing for the U.S. economy. And, you know, a little earlier, you referred to the 19th century period, gunboat economies. And in fact...
Gunboat diplomacy.
Diplomacies, and in the end, it was tightly connected with the economics of the time. Because imperial powers in the 19th century were able to have these trade deficits. Look at France, look at the UK at the time. They were able to sell less to the rest of the world than they were able to buy from the rest of the world, like the US today, right? They're buying more from the rest of the world. Trade deficit. But at the time, these powers, they had colonies. And through their colonies, they were able to make money out of it. The US does not have colonies. So the US is, you know, a military superpower without colonies. And this is precisely what Trump is very worried about. And this is precisely why Trump wants to seize new territories, Greenland, wants to control oil fields in other territories like Venezuela, in order to try to make up for this very difficult and particular situation, which is a huge economic imbalance, through which you have an economy that is partly detained by the rest of the world. And this really relates to this Deutsche Bank report.
All right, and when the president of the... very briefly, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's another colony that is the digital colony. We are also a digital colony of the US, and it's actually making a lot of money. And the question that is on the table right now is, if you start getting European nervous about this, they're going to start looking at digital sovereignty and other means, and that means a lot of money that is going to the US through the digital could actually stop flowing. So there's an interesting way to go back to your point.
Yeah, André Luzacook-Petri, you're joining us via Teams, which is owned by Microsoft, which is a US company. Are we beholden to the Americans on tech the way we're beholden to them on defense?
Yes, and we continue, and this is probably the thing that European leaders continue talking about, but doing exactly the opposite. I mean, we've seen since 4 or 5 years, a number of us calling up not to an anti-Americanism, but that we need to be independent or at least have an alternative for our critical tools. cloud computing, communication means, satellite communication, etc. And just 2 weeks ago, a major French security agency renewed its contract with Palantir. And there's always the same story. Yes, but we have no alternative. Indeed, there's no such alternative as powerful as this data management and intelligence company as Palantir today. But if we don't begin to use public procurement, play the long game, build alternatives on 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and that's a timeline that goes beyond the communication sequences of our leaders. If we don't start to do that, then we are deepening the hole of this dependency that Tarek just mentioned. But let me also tell you, we are not able, I don't know, the coincidence is terrible. The European Parliament or the European institution just today decided to abandon the tax that we wanted to put on digital giants, mainly US, on using our digital infrastructure, cables, etc. So we are not, I mean, I'm a little bit annoyed and fed up with this inconsistency of Macron, of Merz, of von der Leyen that talk sovereignty but act in the opposite way. And the state has been the one that needs to show the way in this public procurement.
But hang on a second, Andre. There have been attempts over the years. The French, for instance, championing their own AI startup, Mistral. Sure. There have been attempts to do that.
Yes, but that's not the state. It's not the state who funded Mistral. It's private investors. Secondly, the latest rounds of these fantastic AI companies have been 80% funded by US venture capitalists who play very well because they have local teams. They play the European sovereignty card, and apparently our leaders are very don't recognize that at the end of the day it's American money invested. And last but not least, the French, the Germans are all supporting their own champions, and we will lose altogether. If France only supports Mistral but not, I don't know, 11 labs out of Poland or Black Forest out of Germany, and Germany only supports its champion and Poland only its champion, well, we will never have the critical mass, the continental mass that we need to compete with the giants. So that's point number one. And point number two, let's not forget that the digital giants of the US make between 30 and 40% of their revenues in Europe. We made a proposal 2 years ago that probably we need to do like the Chinese used to do, is impose joint ventures. If you want to be accessing our market, then we need to have, especially for critical services like cloud and data processing, we need to have European investors to make sure that also part of the revenues, the taxes remain in Europe. And that asks a last question, which is the competition between European states. When the Irish government continues not to tax at the level it should be these digital giants, and I'm not a big fan of taxes, but the level playing field does not exist because European single market is a fallacy today. It's an illusion. Until the leaders do it, we will have this continuous problem. And I must say, Trump and the US players will have a point saying that actually the Europeans are not walking the talk. So before blaming Trump, we should first do our homework and clean our own houses.
All right. When the president of the European Commission traveled last July to a Trump-owned golf course in Scotland and signed a deal that limited U.S. tariffs to 15%, there was nonetheless a sigh of relief and this pledge of no reciprocal tariffs. Do you feel, Lucas Chancel, that, okay, this time, picking up on what André just said, it's different, and that the Europeans understand this idea to call for joint ventures, to not compete against each other when it comes to defense and technology?
Well, I hope it is different from a European
perspective. Does it feel different to you?
I think it is different because of the very concrete threats to the territorial integrity of the bloc. So I think that's the new difference here. Now, I very much agree with what was said by André. I think we haven't even started trying to build these alternatives. In fact, we're not investing enough in our own champions. In tech, in energy, in new technologies, we're not investing enough. And in fact, what is happening is that Europeans continue to invest a lot every year, 300 billion euros invested by Europeans in the United States to finance the way of life of the Americans or to finance these tech companies that then come to Europe, provide services, don't pay their taxes. So we need to invest much more within the European markets. And in order to do that, we need political strategies, we need industrial planning. And I very much like the hat of André, which says, make Europe great again. In fact, Europeans, after the Second World War, they've developed economies where they were able to strategically direct specific sectors of the economy so that they would become world champions. In the energy sector, in the plane sector with Airbus. And so we need to be able to aerospace, we need to be able to do this again. And for this, we need to invest much more. And I think that European countries need to be much more involved in the running of the economy as they have been in the 1980s, as they have been before.
All right, but there was, when it came to General de Gaulle, even he championed a French computer company called Bull, but it never quite worked on a global scale, Bull. Today, how would you go about it differently?
Yes and no. I mean, the whole idea of the French and the English, by the way, was like, if we want to have a nuclear bomb, we need computers. And the Americans didn't want to lend them, so they had this idea, we need to build our own computing facility. Don't forget that, I keep telling that and repeating that, including to the President of Europe, that the web and Linux, that are the two core technology on the internet, have been built in Europe. So we have the know-how. What is interesting right now with Trump is that we always say we get out of our ambiguity to our own detriment, like Cardinal Dorez. And right now, the question is, now that we know that we can't trust, we already knew that the technology of the US, should we get inspired by what the Chinese did, building their own infrastructure from A to Z? Because when you look at what happened with, AI, all the blocus of technology and chipset, China has built its own AI capabilities, and now they're almost at par with the US. The question for us is, now that we know that we're not in a trustworthy internet now, we are going to be in a place where that's the problem with Trump opened that ambiguity. We knew it, but for now it was a hidden secret. Now it's up in the open.
And to get started, you need money. And
Yes.
Is something happening on the quiet? In the last year, Donald Trump was bragging today about all the record highs of the stock market in the United States, but when you factor in the fact that the dollar has lost some of its value,
would
you say that some of that money is coming back to Europe the way Luca would like to say?
But I would slightly disagree. It's not only about money, it's about vision. I think what is interesting at the moment is you have two types of politicians. Politicians that believe that if you wait 2 years, we'll get back to normal, business as usual, so we don't need to do all the fuss about digital sovereignties.
3 years, you mean, to wait until Donald
exactly.
Trump leaves.
And people like, I think, André and I will believe that we will never go back to the old world. It's a new world with new rules, and we need to adapt to it. And that is something that I think most politicians need to understand. And I think what we see in Davos this year is that it's clear and obvious that we're not getting back to the old world. And there are new rules. They're very uncomfortable. We need to move fast. We need to figure out ways to understand our leverage, our own leverage, not only, and understand that we need to get out of this current situation. And it's going to take time and money and effort, but we need to do it.
Yeah, maybe adding that Europeans typically feel and think that they are not rich enough to do these investments. And in fact, this is a very wealthy continent with a lot of resources and with a lot of wealth. Now, I think that if you want to generate resources to invest, you can use private investors, but you also need to use public investors. And for that, this means taxes, as was referred to by Andre before. So basically, you need to tax these big tech companies much more than we've been able to tax them before. And this is not a lack of possibilities, it's a lack of political will. So I think the starting point really is political will. And the second point, if I may, is that a few months ago, Brazil came about with a proposal to tax ultra-high net worth individuals in the G20. Right?
Yeah.
And Europe and most European countries actually basically said, okay, let's see, but they didn't move forward with the proposal. So you can also create alliances with other countries in the world that are not the United States, that might be Brazil, that might be South Africa, that might be other countries from the BRICS on these reforms of international taxation. And this is how you're going to get your revenues to invest in the things that matters.
So this Mercosur free trade deal between Europe and South America that's hit another speed bump this Wednesday with the European Parliament referring it to the highest jurisdiction on the continent. Is that a good thing?
Well, there are issues associated with, signing these huge mega trade deals that might not be perfect for the environment. Right? And this is a euphemism, I think. But now you can sign much more practical and targeted deals related to defense, for instance, related to taxation, for instance, and certain types of agricultural trade. This was maybe too big of a deal in order to pass in 2026. It was started, as we know, several decades ago. The world has changed.
Andre Luzakovsky, you're in Davos. So have you been able, over the past 3 days, to figuratively read the room? What do corporate executives think? Are they in concurrence with the three of you that the old world is finished and the new world yet to begin? Or are they, like Tariq was describing it, hoping that an election will make things the way they were before? And also, what do they think? We heard Scott Bessent say, the worst thing you can do is retaliate. Just wait. It'll all be okay. Just don't retaliate, was his advice in an interview he gave on Tuesday. What do people think? What did they make of Donald Trump's offensive language? For them, it's just par for the course? Or this time, is it different? Does it feel different?
It's interesting because last year, you were referring to this cap. A lot of people were basically the message of this cap is we should not leave boldness to the extremes, and all those who believe in progress, in humanistic values, should be a little bit more courageous and show more spine. And interestingly, last year, CEOs were reluctant, and I can understand that because they have business in the US, and we all know how much people thought that they could please and flatter, and that would make them muddle through. I felt that many more leaders today realize, number one, that enough is enough. Secondly, that they realize that our societies, our population is also looking for a little bit more spine, to take the words of the Californian government, Governor Newsom. And that is the way that you inspire respect. And third, that actually not showing strengths is actually bad on the long term. So I felt many more, it's not a question of being disrespectful, it's not a question of escalating, but actually this muddle through policy, which I worry very much a lot of European leaders will return tomorrow because they feel the immediate military threat is somewhat alleviated. Actually, no. This is why Mark Carney was so right. It's a strategic shift. And we need to just embrace this new world, that we like it or not, and adapt to its rule. Maybe one word I would like to say
just one thing on this point,
yeah.
Because I want to ask you a Davos-specific question here, Andre. There was Donald Trump's plane, which was delayed. Because of that, a meeting with the German chancellor was scrapped. France's president had floated the idea of an informal G7 with Trump to patch over this whole Greenland thing on Thursday. The White House said no. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who's a Democrat, he was in the room during Trump's speech. Do you regret the fact that European leaders, like the Prime Minister of Denmark, did not go to Davos? Do you wish that there had been a sit-down with Trump? Or is it better to be there or not to be there, is my question.
And that's up to the politicians to decide. But I think today, the capacity of a couple of leaders to show that they have understood the new world, the new rules, and that they're ready to be up to the task, confront with ideas, with position, with strategies, is what needs to happen. We cannot just delay. I mean, we talked a lot about money. What actually is clear in Davos is that speed is the new factor of success of this world. And so if you don't set the agenda, somebody else will set it for you. And that's the whole strategy of Donald Trump. Everybody was expecting his speech. Now everybody is commenting on his speech. Tomorrow, the European leaders will react upon his speech. That is a losing strategy. We need to set the agenda ourselves. We need to have a strategy for Greenland ourselves. We need to have a strategy for technology ourselves, and not just always waiting for the wars coming out of Davos. So I think confronting, being there, being in the room is the strategy to follow.
And of course, artificial intelligence is the big talking point all around, has been for the last 2 years. And the chip's really yet to fall on AI. We saw in 2025 it did not destroy jobs at the rate that some predicted, but that could still happen this year. What it has done, and Tariq was mentioning it earlier, is suck the air out of the rest of the stock market. Tech stocks make up some 40% of the value in the US. When the valuation of chip maker NVIDIA topped $5 trillion, that's trillion dollars, at the end of October, there was talk of a bubble that grew more insistent. NVIDIA's CEO attending the World Economic Forum and telling an audience in Davos that it's normal. Big investments for big infrastructure projects attract big money.
I think the opportunity is really quite extraordinary, and everybody ought to get involved. Everybody ought to get engaged. We need more energy. I think that we all recognize that. We need more land power and shell. We need more trade skill workers.
Come on in, the water's fine, Tariq Krim?
It's debatable. I think the amount of debt and unstructured debt, now we are looking at data centers. You know, we're building more data center in America that we're building traditional house and offices. And right now, the level of debt is astounding. We start to look at this and we wonder, how is it sustainable? The other issue, as you mentioned, is energy. Europe had, and especially France, has plenty of energy. In America, the grid is so delayed. We need to build new things, and nothing will come out of the ground until the next 3 years. So
let me put this to Lucas Chancel. What do you make of that speech by Donald Trump, where he talked forever about how windmills are terrible, and and you just heard Tariq saying, that there's this huge energy need.
Well, he's taken a stand in the climate challenge, and he's taken the stand of petrol and of coal. And it's not new, but it's very clear. And when he intervenes with the army in Venezuela, it's because he's taken that stand. Climate denialism and supporting multinationals of oil and gas. And so this comes with criticizing windmills. This comes with criticizing solar energy. Although these energies are, from an economic perspective, an extremely good thing to have when you don't have infinite coal and oil resources, which is the case of the United States. And so I think the other important thing to have in mind is that electricity bills for many Americans have increased by 20%. Why? Because of AI data center needs.
even more in some places.
And in some places, even more than 20%. But on average, in several states, 20%, which is already a big increase. What most of Americans want today is cheaper, more affordable living. And this is what all polls are saying. And in fact, if Trump is looking at Greenland, if Trump is talking about international politics, is to try to avoid having this discussion at home where he is clearly failing. And so what we should look at is what is happening on the national scene, because there are a lot of people that are frustrated with the cost of living in the US, and Trump is not doing anything to counter that.
So let me follow up on that. There was, on the topic of Greenland, there are mining companies prospecting. One is called Cobalt Metals, which while the U.S. was brokering a deal between Rwandans and Congolese, just happened to get exploration permits in eastern Congo. It's already present in neighboring Zambia, and it's eyeing Greenland. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, but also Michael Bloomberg are among the big investors. So is it really a scramble for raw materials, this whole Greenland thing? Is that what this is about, Lucas Chancel?
Well, the territory, according to the American administration itself, hosts 43 out of 50 critical raw material resources that are judged essential by the administration. So yes, this is a land of resources. This is a land of critical minerals that are very important for the renewable energy industry, but also for the aerospace industry and also for the military industry. So for sure, Greenland is a space that, from the perspective of Trump, needs to be grabbed for its resources and for the maritime routes, the sea routes that might open up because of climate change.
All right, so you're taking it, Lucas Chancel, taking it at face value, this bid for Greenland. Do you do that as well, Tariq?
So I've been in Greenland a couple of times, and it's a wonderful place. And first of all, I think it's going to be very expensive. I believe that there's a reality check coming in as well, is that there's the you were talking about energy. To my knowledge, U.S. is a net exporter of energy at the moment. So
thanks to oil.
Thanks to oil and shale, and the industry has adapted. Same way with you were talking about solar. I think the easiest way to get energy at the moment is solar and renewable. So I think there's a vision right now of what we can do to get our friends rich and surround ourselves with things that are not in the long term good for the U.S. And the question
our friends rich. So you're saying this is about Donald Trump's personal enrichment and that of his friends?
I'm talking about all the companies that said we will profit from this. We will get access to energy. I think when the reason everyone was sitting next to Donald Trump was they need fast access to energy. They already have money. They already have power. What they don't have is energy to fuel the data centers. And now they're opening permits. There's going to be there's about 2,000, I think, data centers being opened in the world. And America it's booming. It's a completely new gold rush. The question is, when will the music stop? I think at the moment everything is put under the rug, but I think there's going to be a serious question about how we can fund this next year. And if AI goes not as good as we expect, as you said, locally, I mean, for the Americans, locally, what we talk about is AI is going to take your job. Your electric bill is going to go high, and I think
the price of health.
Yes, health, exactly, and we're going to have to pivot. And I think for the moment, a lot of these conversations are about getting the conversation away from the critical issues, as you mentioned.
Could the music stop in 2026?
It could. We don't know yet. We don't know what's going to be the triggering event, but we have to say there's a lot of possible now triggering events, because we have so many, I would say, with Venezuela, with the tech Cold War with China, with Europe now. We don't know what's going to be the triggering event, but it could, or maybe next year.
And again, a common theme at Davos is talking about AI, talking about energy, and in the case of the Americans, bashing Europeans, all in one. Donald Trump's trade secretary, again, berating this move to try to steer clear of fossil fuels.
Why are you going to do solar and wind? Why would Europe agree to be net zero in 2030 when they don't make a battery? They don't make a battery. So if they go 2030, they are deciding to be subservient to China, who makes the batteries. Why would you do that? Why would the United States of America, which has oil and natural gas, try to convert to all electricity?
What was your reaction, Andrei Lezakug-Petri, listening to that?
Well, unfortunately, but for the wrong reasons, he has a point. The dependency of Europe to US gas has never been as high. We basically changed our dependency after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine from Russian gas, especially the Germans, which is the industrial heartland of Europe, to very quickly being super dependent to US liquefied natural gas. Secondly, he has also a point on batteries. We have not been able, remember there was a big economic failure with Northvolt, which was this huge Swedish project of building a battery gigafactory to supply most of the large European automakers. That went south with 12 billion investments lost. What we should do is quietly prepare the decoupling. And unfortunately, it's an authoritarian state like China who has shown that they patiently built up their independence from fossil fuel, probably less for ideological reasons than we have been, but to be less dependent on the US. And now that they're less dependent, because contrary to what Donald Trump said in his speech, there are a lot of wind farms in China, as well as many nuclear plants. They're building as many nuclear plants as France has built in the 70s now. They are now more able to play a power game, especially on critical materials. Europe has been tactical. The Germans have been catastrophically, there's no other word to say than stupid, in their energy transition. Today, they are as dependent as before, have destroyed the nuclear industry, have twice, at least, if not more, electricity prices. So that's driving the industry down. And we have not solved the long-term independence strategy. So how can we get again a 5 to 10 year perspective and build again our independence while keeping our values? That's why I think the value of becoming less dependent on fossil fuel is still something that the Europeans should stick to. What we see today is dismantling of the Green Deal. So we are releasing our values, but we are not building our dependence because we are running. And I see an image of President von der Leyen, but Ms. von der Leyen has just increased massively our dependency to the US with the Commission strategy since 2 years.
Lucas Chancel, again, are we at a turning point where perhaps maybe we will stick to that Green New Deal target of 2030 for carbon neutrality inside the European Union?
You know, what's paradoxical is that many political groups, often from the far right, who've been talking about sovereignty all day long, are those who have tried to disrupt and dismantle the Green Deal. When we are realizing now that the green transition, decarbonization, is the condition for freedom and for sovereignty within the European Union. So I really think that we somewhat need to change the discussion about climate change. Yes, we need to do this to save the planet, but we also need to do this to stay independent. And when Ursula von der Leyen signs a deal which says that we're going to, last summer, that we're going to agree to buy worth 750 billion US worth of US shale gas, I think this really goes against the state of things and the state of events. And the final point here that...
Final, because we're out of time.
Yeah, the Chinese have been able to crack it, not because they're authoritarian, but because they've done good economic policy.
All right, we'll leave it there. And of course, whether or not we're going to pick up on this Europe sovereignty theme in Thursday's show when there's that EU summit. I want to thank you, Lucas Chancel. I want to thank Tariq Krim and André Lizakug-Petri for joining us from on high at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.